When you open a burst PSD, you find yourself in this situation that is not ideal to make animation because you need a timeline. So if you go under, in Photoshop, under Window, Workspace, and choose Motion, you'll see that at the very bottom down here, the timeline shows up. Stop me at any minute if you need help. What I want you to notice is a few things. In that timeline, let's look at the interface. This button at the very bottom left allows you to switch between an animation timeline that is built with what we call frames. This is one frame. It's like a little sheet of paper. And if you remember when you guys as children did flip-a-books, that's the idea. So imagine that is the very first, drawing in your flip book. But if you want to, you can click on here and switch to video. Not that right now I can do it because I don't have video loaded on here, but if I could actually create a new file, start a video animation, and import videos onto my timeline. I do not use Photoshop for videos because it takes a very long time to render those videos. I suggest you use Adobe Premiere, Final Cut Pro, even iMovie for videos if you can. But Photoshop is possible, and it uses the same principle I'm teaching you right now in animation, is you load things in the timeline and then you export them to whatever you want it to be. So that forever means your animation loops forever. Do you remember the example I showed you earlier with the person waking up in the morning, and I said Cesar decided to make a loop forever, keep looping. So here is where you decide if you want to loop forever or play it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Here are the controllers all of us know from VCRs and stuff. This is the play button, go forward, go backward, go to the very beginning. This other button, the one next to the plus sign, is indicator of doing something called tweening, that in animation many of you already probably know means when you set an initial state, a final state, and ask the computer to do the in-between. And I'll show you how to do that. And then here allows you to create a new frame, just like that icon allowed you to create a new layers or a new channels and new things. Whatever palette you have, that plus sign allows you to add to that palette or panel, I don't know how to call it correctly. And this obviously allows you to delete frames. Another thing I want you to pay close attention to is when I built this very sophisticated, graphics, I'm very sarcastic here, I set it up that I have a main shape, I have a background, white, a main shape, I have more shapes, and I have more shapes, right? So it's set up in the layers that is kind of like bursting. So how do I make a really burst, animate? So you want to create a new frame, just like you would do in a flipbook situation, and go and turn visible the burst one, the first, basically layer that wasn't visible and now is visible. And then you want to create another one, and you turn visible burst 2. And believe it or not, when I hit the play button, it's going to burst, kind of. Very fast, not ideal. How do I change the speed? You guys see that right below each frame, it says 0 seconds. You could change the speed individually for each frame, or you can hold the shift button and select them all and go down here and say, I want it to be at 0.2 seconds. And now when you play it, it's going to go a bit slower. In there, you can say, oh, and I want it to play only 3 times or only once or other, and you can spell it out 6 times. But that's kind of, how you create this, basic animation. It's pretty much having a very organized approach to your layer stack, right? To put in your layers where you need, and then be very meticulously, careful about what you turn on and off. There is a little bit of a catch. Let's say you plan your animation and then you realize, oh, I wish there was a butterfly, flying around, or a ball, bouncing up and down. If at the end of your animation you add anything, it will be added to all the frames. So for example, if I go in here and I create a little circle right here and I fill it, it could do option delete, but I don't know which color I have in my foreground or background because my interface is cropped because of the projector. So I'm going to say I know my foreground is white and my background is black. If I did Option Delete, it would, fill it with white and I would not be able to see it. And that's why I went in Edit Fill and chose the background. I guess I could hit X and those white and black and white would reverse and then do Option Delete. But anyway, let's say I add this dot right there and I say Command, oh, sorry, I did a mistake. I'm going to put it on a separate layer. Everything you want to animate, everything that you animate separately has to be on a separate layer. Okay, now I'm going to hit X like I told you earlier and do Option Delete. Boom. So now you can see I have a layer 1 now that is ready to animate, but in the meantime, it got placed in all my frames. Even though maybe I wanted it only in the last frame, and the last frame was what I had selected, in the minute in which you add a new layer, it gets added everywhere. And right now it's no big deal, right? Because we have 3, so I can just go in the first one and turn off layer 1, and the second one and turn off layer 1, and the third one, turn off layer 1, and then maybe create a 4th one in which layer 1 shows up, for example. But if you had 300 frames, it would be time consuming. Now you could obviously select them all. So if that ball was in all of them, you can shift click and select them all and then go and turn it off. And now all your frames have that layer removed. But my point is, you should do really careful planning, because every time you add extra layers, it's going to kind of, I don't want to say mess up your animation, but that element is going to be spread across the whole animation, even though you might just want it at that particular point in time. Does it make sense? How do I export this? What do you think I do to get this to be ultimately an animated GIF that I can play on a browser? You already learned this. Yes. Exactly what we did a long time ago. Export, save for web legacy. Boom. Good job, Taz. And now you go in here. Now, very careful though, guys, because I've seen people doing some beautiful elaborate animation and then exported them as a JPEG. What happens if I export as a JPEG? What do you think it happens? Give it a guess. You guys remember when we talked about the different compressions, image optimization? What does GIF support? What does JPEG support? What is GIF ideal for? GIF is ideal for graphic images, stands for graphic interchange format. It's fantastic because it's lossless. You don't lose any information. Supports transparency and supports animation. JPEG is ideal for photograph, stands for Joint Photographic Expert Group. Wants to place transitions everywhere. So if you compress a graphic image as a JPEG, it sometimes adds a bunch of noise where there are a contrast between colors. It does not support transparency. It does not support animation and is lossy. The fact that it does not support animation tells you right away that if I save this as a JPEG, my animation is gone, right? So I'm going to save it as a GIF because we guys all agree we want it to be an animated element. That's what I did before. And unfortunately, my interface is cropped, so I cannot see save. What a bummer. Oh, there we are. Hit save. And it's called Burst GIF. Let me put it in Photoshop Advanced or whatever, wherever I was, right here, and say save. So now if I minimize this and I go and grab that GIF and put it on a browser, boom, there it is. So let's do something more complicated, right? Not too much more complicated. As I said, I'm going to repeat these a few times because that way you kind of remember. And obviously I want you to do it as well. They're not, terribly indispensable or common. They used to be, but they're still kind of handy tools if you want to do a small animation in a web page or something like simple. The animated GIF still does the job, without having to go into purchasing a whole different software called Animate and stuff. So this time I would like you to open the file called, let's do Tar-Pit. Choose Tar-Pit or Tar-Pit 1. Either one will work. And then we do 1/3 one, and then I feel like we got enough animation, in terms of animated GIFs. If we do it 3 times, it should sync. Same. The Tar-Pit has, right now is in the normal state is up, but imagine that you want to do a little, graphic for a kids camp, and it's called Tar-Pit Discovery Week because the children are going to learn about tar or whatever. Actually, I remember doing a beautiful class on painting with tar in Mexico. When I was in Mexico, it's not called chapapote. It has a particular name, but there are certain painters that pioneered this technique. So let's say that you want to do a graphic for a children camp that does something like that. So the client tells you, I want to have first just this graphic, and then I want the sunken state to show up, means a little fellow to come up, and then the normal state to be up, and then I want it to go back down to this. So I would take the sunken state, by the way, and move it below the normal state so we can go in an order, right? Goes up and then goes fully up. I'm going to go and add a frame to my timeline. Is everybody with me with the tar pit open? Cool. I add a frame, and I go and make the sunken state visible. I add another frame, and I make the normal state visible, and I make the sunken state disappear by just turning the little eye in the layers, visible, invisible, right? So now I need to kind of make the guy go back down. One quick and easy way to do it, because I can keep creating frames, or I can shift click the last two frames. And this helps you because it teaches you how to use the timeline power. You go under the options in the timeline, and I say copy frames. So I clicked on the last frame, shift clicked it on the second one, shift clicked on the second one, and then I went onto that little option right here and said copy frames. Then I clicked on the third frame and went and said, okay, now paste frames in the same place, and I'm going to say paste them after selection. Boom. So now, oh yeah, another thing, I need to revert them. And in fact, I made a mistake. I should have copied the whole three. So I'm going to select the whole three, because I still need also the very last, that there is no tar pit creature, but there is the tar hole. So I'm going to again say copy frames, select the third state, third frame, and say paste frames after the selection. Boom. Then I'm going to take those, and I'm going to still go in the same, control panel in the timeline, and I'm going to say revert frames. So I'm going to reverse frames right there. So now I have my whole, the tar pit goes up even more, and then goes down and goes down. The only issue is I kind of made a mistake again. I copied the frame 3, and it became frame 4 when I did the reverse, but we have a double. So it's as simple as clicking on the trash can, and it's going to go away. So now I have what the client wanted. The tar pit goes up, and then it comes down. I need to play it 3 times instead of forever right here, and I am good to go. Also I'm going to hold the shift key, and I'm going to make it 0.2 seconds because it's a little bit too crazy otherwise. It goes too fast with 0 seconds, and boom, there we are. And the tar pit goes up and down 3 times. Boom. So that's kind of the idea with animation. Obviously, once again, you go and export it as a GIF. Now, though, there is a little difficulty, and that's why I brought in the third and last animation. What if you actually want to animate something that has a very photographic appeal to it? And the problem with photographic is it's going to make everything pretty big. So, for example, the burst is only 5 kbyte. It's tiny. Let's actually see what the tar pit ends up being if we export it again. So export. Let's make it on a GIF. Again, it's tiny. It's 5K. Wow, sweet. I love that. I love small files, especially when they have to play on a browser, right? So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to call it tar pit, and again, and it's 5K. So now, open for me this time the one that has actually photos. In fact, it's called Photos PSD. So I had 3 photos, and a client tells me, I want you to do a animation with this. But the photos were full-blown color. So one way to make them smaller, not as pretty much big in file size. A part of that, by the way, you always want to go in image size, no matter what you do with animated GIF. Make sure you always have a 72 in resolution, and the smallest that can be in pixels. So for example, if you know that you're inserting this one on a website, you would want to go and look at your website layout and say, okay, this image needs to occupy about 300 frames, so that's what I'm going to make it, or 250. Do you know what I mean? You really need to be smart, because every extra pixel, no matter if it's in width or height or in resolution, is going to make the file size bigger. The smaller the better, obviously, because we're talking about loading over the internet, right? So what I did is I went and created, if you remember, we talked about how to create duotones, right? You want to go in whenever you have a full-blown color image, you want to go in image mode, you switch to grayscale first, and then once you switch to grayscale, you can go back into image mode and choose duotone and decide which 2 colors you want. I don't know if you remember that. We did it when we did color correcting in 182. Is everybody with me about that? It's a matter of doing this 2-step process of first turning into grayscale through the image mode, and then once you turn it into grayscale, you have that duotone as an option, and you can make it into a 2-color deal. So that's what I did with these images. They were in color. I said, okay, I'm going to make it into duotones, and that's what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create another frame, and I'm going to say T-ball is visible, and then create another frame and do coffee visible. In fact, in the T-ball, in the second one, I'm going to turn off the cafe. I apologize. And in the cafe, I'm going to turn off the other 2. All right? So each frame has only 1 image to remember. Right? We talked about how the smaller, the better. So now, if I went and played it, it goes insane. Definitely not a pleasant thing. The client is going to kill me. I better do something better than that, right? Everybody with me so far? So what can we do with this? So I suggest we tween the opacity so that the first image fades out and the other one fades in. What is the problem with that, though, if we do that right now? What I mean is that the image called cafe, that is the first one that shows up, is going to fade from 100% to 0%. And the second one is going to fade from 0 to 100 and et cetera, et cetera. What's the problem with that? Yes. We need a white background. That's what the problem is. Because what we'll do is when these things fade, then we will see whatever is on the background. It might be fine if in your HTML, your web page already has specified white as a background, so we're good. But just for the sake of this, since we're not putting this into an HTML in this class, I'm going to create one more layer right here. I'm going to say Command A for select all. I'm going to hit X because I know my foreground is black because earlier I did a black ball, and X inverted the black and the white in the foreground background at the bottom of your tools that I cannot see because of the fact that I'm connected to a projector. And then I'm going to do Option Delete to fill it. So now I have a white background. Okay, Command D. So how do I fade, though, my images? You remember that button I mentioned earlier called Tween? If I click on that Tween button, it allows me to add a certain amount of frames. Let's say that I'm going to add 3, not 5 because they're less. Let me actually show everyone again. So let's select the second frame, not the first one. Select the second frame, or even the third one. Let's go in reverse just for fun. You can decide in which direction you want to go. You'll see that you have control over choosing what are you tweening toward. So I'm going to choose the third frame that has a cafe. I'm going to click on this little button that is just next to the plus sign in the timeline that has those little dots that looks like they're fading away. And that's the tween option. And I'm saying I want you to tween everything. I could uncheck position and effects and it will still do it. In fact, let's do that. And I'm going to say that I want 3 frames. And here I can choose if I want to tween with the previous frames or the first frames or what. Now, because the computer is smart and I chose the third frame, knows that there is nothing after. That is why it's giving me the options of the previous or the first. So I'm choose previous and I'm going to say OK. So as you can see now, if you take that frame 3 that I had selected, it goes away and cafes shows up. So I'm going to do the same thing with frame 2. I'm going to go in frame 2. I'm going to click the tween button. And I'm going to say with the previous frame, OK. And I'm going to do the same thing with the frame 1. This time I'm going to tween it with the cafe, right? So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on here. And I'm going to say, instead of next frames, I'm going to say I want to tween it with the last frame. That is the cafe image right here. And I'm going to say OK. So now if I select them all right here, and instead of 0 point something second, I choose 0.2, so it stays a little longer. And instead of forever, I say I want it to play only once. Now when I click on the first one, I hit the play button, I have a really neat slideshow. Moving too fast still. So I'm going to go in and select them all and say I want a 0.5. and try again and see if it does what I want it to do. Yeah, now it's pretty cool. So now I can export this one as an animated GIF, pop into my websites, or do whatever I want with it. So remember that when you do have photograph, you can still manage to get, oh, by the way, this image should also be at the end. You see that the end kind of stays appended. I need, again, this first frame at the very end. I know how to do it, right? I go and I say copy frame. I go at the very last frame and I say paste frame. And it tells me after the selection, cool. So now if I want to play continuously, I did not need this last frame, but if I play only once, I definitely need it because then it will stop on a full image instead of a halfway image. So that's why I made that last frame there. So what is the secret to animated GIFs is to kind of like really be organized about the layer stack. Now I want to show you one more thing and then I'm done. I told you the story. If right now I put a ball somewhere, like if I create a new layer right here, put it at the very top, and I create anything, like a ball that I wanted to bounce around or just anything. And again, I'm going to hit X and Option Delete, so I fill it with black. You can see that now that ball is in all my 13 frames. So be aware that that can get in your way. Another thing I want to show you is I showed you how to tween stuff based on what is in the layers. But there is another thing you need to know. If we're tweening opacity or we're just tweening across images, that's what you need to do, what I just showed you. Let me create a brand new document so you can also see something really interesting. When I turn a brand new document on, this time, in the past one, you already had this situation going on. The timeline was already set to animation. But when you create your own, you'll find yourself with this predicament that you can choose if you want a video timeline or an animation. You obviously want to click on here, and it will create the animation if animation is what you want to do. But let me show you now. If I create that famous ball that I've been creating because I wanted to kind of bounce across the screen, so I just created a new layer. Now, do I need, if I wanted to bounce to the end of the screen, do I need to create another ball on a separate layer that is at the bottom of the screen? No. If you're tweaking motion, you can simply create a new frame, use the move tool to grab your ball and move it to the bottom of the screen. You can hold the shift key or not, you know, if you want to constrain it to 45 degrees. In my case, it's not a square, so it would not. But as you can see, I still have just layer one, in which in frame one, the ball is at the top, and in frame two, in layer one, the ball is at the bottom. And now, obviously, I want to add some tweens, or it's going to go nutso, you know, be very, very quick and jumpy. So I'm going to say I want 6 frames in between, for example. And now when I go in and add a little time, like 0.2 seconds, and I hit the play button, my ball should move across the screen. What happened? Oh, yeah, I made a mistake. No. For some mysterious reason, it didn't do it as it should. Let me actually delete these and do a little test. So the good news with the timeline, you can delete and do whatever you want with it, even delete the animation. So I have the ball that goes here, the ball that is here. Oh, yeah, I know what my mistake maybe was, is that I did not do the tween from the second layer. I did it from the first one. So I want to tween to the previous frame. Oh, yeah, that's the problem. From the past animation, I had unchecked position. Shoot, that's my mistake, right? Means I did not pay attention to the fact that I oftentimes don't even uncheck these. I just wanted you to be aware. I try to leave them all checked because if there is no position motion, it will not apply it. So that was my mistake. So now when I hit OK, this time when I play it, it should play nicely. So I'm going to actually be happy that I made that mistake. So if you see that things are not working, there is very big chance that in your tweening, you unchecked what you needed. So my mistake be a treasure to you.